A millionaire saves a young boy who collapsed in front of his mansion. A few days later, ambulances and police cars are screaming all over his estate because the iron gates of the Erickson estate groaned open as the first light of dawn spilled over the manicured hedges and glistened off the frost-laden grass. Nathan Erickson, wrapped in a tailored overcoat, stepped out into the biting cold. The crisp morning air stung his face, and each exhale formed wisps of fog that dissolved as quickly as they appeared. He paused at the top of the marble steps, the silence around him so pristine that it felt almost intrusive. The faint crunch of gravel disrupted his thoughts. Nathan's sharp gaze flickered toward the driveway. Nothing stirred, yet the sound lingered in his mind, distant but insistent, like an echo of something unseen. Then he heard it, a muffled, pitiful whimper, barely audible against the whisper of the wind. He turned toward the noise, scanning the foot of the steps. There, curled up like a discarded rag doll, was a small, frail figure. Nathan descended cautiously, his leather shoes clicking against the cold stone. As he neared, the details emerged. A boy, no older than 8 or 9, dressed in tattered clothing that clung pitifully to his skeletal frame. His thin arms were wrapped around himself, trembling against the winter's chill. His head lolled to the side, revealing a pale, dirt-streaked face, half hidden beneath a mop of dark, matted hair. Nathan hesitated. His first instinct was to call for security. Strangers didn't simply wander onto his estate, especially not children. But the boy's state gave him pause. One hand clutched a threadbare jacket against his chest as though it were armor. In the other, he clung to a photograph, creased and worn, of a smiling woman whose face was barely visible under the grime. Nathan crouched, his tailored trousers brushing the cold stone. "Hey," he said, his voice low but firm. "Can you hear me?" The boy didn't respond. His breath came in short, labored gasps that puffed weakly into the frigid air. Nathan extended a hand, but the boy flinched, even unconscious, his body instinctively retreating further into itself. For a moment, Nathan froze. The man who had spent decades mastering negotiations, commanding boardrooms, and navigating labyrinthine deals, now found himself uncertain over what to do with a child on his doorstep. His hand hovered before he withdrew it, glancing back toward the house. "Elizabeth," he murmured to himself. The name steadied him. Straightening, he slipped his arms beneath the boy's frail frame, his hands pressing against skin so cold it made him wince. The boy's head lolled against Nathan's chest as he lifted him, alarmingly light, like a bundle of dried twigs. Nathan hurried back up the steps, every step heavier with the weight of uncertainty. Inside, the warmth of the grand foyer enveloped him, but it felt somehow hollow against the scene unfolding. The chandelier above cast a golden glow over polished floors and towering pillars, starkly contrasting the boy's disheveled figure in Nathan's arms. "Teresa!" Nathan's voice echoed through the space, sharp and commanding. A middle-aged woman in a pressed uniform appeared almost instantly, her expression flickering between confusion and alarm as she took in the scene. "Prepare a guest room," Nathan said briskly. "And bring blankets, hot water, quickly." Teresa nodded, disappearing down the corridor. From the far side of the room, the hum of wheelchair wheels preceded the arrival of Elizabeth Erickson. Her presence, though subdued, filled the space. Draped in an elegant cashmere shawl, her sharp blue eyes immediately settled on the boy. "Nathan." Her voice was soft, questioning but not accusatory. Nathan turned, his jaw tightening. "I found him outside," he said simply. Elizabeth rolled closer, her gaze studying the boy's face, lingering on the grime and the fragile clutch of the photograph in his hand. She didn't speak for a moment, her expression unreadable, before she finally murmured, "He looks like he hasn't eaten in days." Nathan's eyes flicked to the photograph, still trapped in the boy's fingers. "And he's alone," he added, almost to himself. The boy stirred faintly, his head shifting against Nathan's chest, but his eyes remained closed. Elizabeth's gaze softened. "We should find out what happened to him," she said, her tone laced with quiet insistence. Nathan nodded, though his mind was already spinning. Who was this boy? Why had he ended up here, of all places? And what kind of desperation had driven him to collapse on the doorstep of a stranger? As Teresa returned with a bundle of blankets, and a young maid trailed behind her with steaming towels, Nathan carried the boy toward the staircase. Elizabeth remained in place, watching them ascend. Her fingers tightened on the arms of her wheelchair, a flicker of something unspoken crossing her face. She had always been the observer, the anchor when Nathan charged ahead. But this boy's arrival felt different, like a thread pulled loose from the fabric of their carefully constructed life. The heavy curtains, drawn against the glaring morning sun, dimly lit the room. A faint scent of eucalyptus lingered in the air, mingling with the warmth from the fireplace. Peter stirred beneath a thick quilt, his eyelids fluttering open. His gaze darted wildly around the unfamiliar room for a moment, the opulence of the dark wood furniture and the chandelier above him a stark contrast to the cold stone walls he was familiar with. He tried to sit up, but his muscles betrayed him, weak from exhaustion. The door creaked open. Peter froze, his small frame tensing as Nathan stepped inside. Nathan paused at the threshold, his silhouette framed by the soft glow of the hallway light. He held a steaming cup of tea in one hand, his expression unreadable but not unkind. "You're awake," Nathan said, his deep voice filling the room. Peter didn't respond, his dark eyes narrowing with suspicion. He shifted slightly, the quilt slipping down to reveal his thin arms. The boy's hand instinctively reached for the photograph tucked under the covers, clutching it as though it were a lifeline. Nathan set the cup down on the bedside table and pulled a chair closer, its legs scraping softly against the hardwood floor. He sat with a deliberate calm, leaning forward slightly, his hands clasped. "You're safe here," he began, his tone measured. "No one will hurt you." Peter's grip on the photograph tightened. His lips parted, but no words came out. Instead, he stared at Nathan, his expression a mix of fear and defiance. Nathan sighed, running a hand through his black streaked hair. "I don't know where you came from," he continued, "but you were freezing on my doorstep. If I hadn't brought you inside—" He stopped himself, realizing the futility of finishing the sentence. A soft knock broke the silence. Elizabeth's wheelchair appeared in the doorway, and her eyes immediately found Peter. "I thought you might need this," she said, holding up a tray with a bowl of soup and a slice of bread. Her voice was gentle, unassuming, the way one might speak to a cornered animal. Peter's gaze flicked between Nathan and Elizabeth, his body rigid. "Just try a little," Elizabeth urged. "You must be hungry." There was something disarming in her tone, a quiet persistence that softened Peter's scowl. Slowly, he extended a trembling hand toward the tray. Elizabeth wheeled closer, setting it on the small table beside the bed, careful not to startle him. He took the bread first, tearing off a small piece and chewing cautiously. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly, though his eyes never left Nathan. "What's your name?" Nathan asked after a moment. Peter swallowed, hesitating before muttering, "Peter." "How old are you, Peter?" 10. This time he responded more quickly, even though his voice was barely audible. Elizabeth smiled faintly, her hands resting on the edges of her wheelchair. 10 is a good age," she said. "I bet you're smart." Peter didn't respond, but his expression softened just enough for Nathan to notice. Encouraged, Nathan leaned forward. "Peter, "Can you tell us where you came from?" he asked, keeping his voice even. "We just want to help." At that, Peter's face darkened. He shoved the photograph deeper under the quilt, his gaze hardening. "I don't need help," he snapped, his small frame shaking. Elizabeth spoke before Nathan could respond. "It's okay," she said gently. "You don't have to tell us anything if you're not ready." The boy's jaw tightened, but he didn't retreat further. Minutes passed in silence, punctuated only by the crackle of the fire. Peter finished the bread and soup in small, deliberate bites, as though rationing each morsel. Finally, he spoke, his voice so low that Nathan had to strain to hear. "I ran away," Peter admitted. From them." "Who's them?" Nathan asked carefully. Peter hesitated, his eyes darting to the photograph before looking away. "The orphanage," he said at last. They don't care about us. They hurt us. And if you fight back, it gets worse." Elizabeth's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Nathan felt his chest tighten, a cold weight settling there. "How long were you there?" Nathan asked, his tone softer now. Peter shrugged, his expression guarded. "Since I was little. I don't remember when." "Why did you leave?" The boy's fingers tightened around the quilt, his knuckles white. He whispered, his voice breaking. "No one else would come for me. I had to run. No one else would come." Nathan sat back, the boy's words cutting deeper than he'd expected. A memory surfaced unbidden. A young woman storming out of the Erickson estate years ago, her face streaked with tears. He pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on Peter, who now clung to the photograph as though it were the only thing anchoring him to the room. Nathan didn't know why he felt so compelled to help this boy, but as he watched Peter's small frame curl up beneath the quilt, his resolve hardened. For now, he would let the boy rest. Answers could wait. Peter stood in the middle of the vast marble hallway, his bare feet silent against the cold, polished floor. The grand staircase twisted up toward the second level like the spine of a giant, its mahogany rails gleaming under the golden glow of the chandelier. He craned his neck, his eyes wide, taking in the high ceilings painted with intricate frescoes of clouds and winged cherubs. He had never seen a place like this. It was as though he had stepped into one of the picture books the older kids at the orphanage hoarded, pages worn thin by tiny, desperate fingers searching for a glimpse of somewhere better. "Careful with the vase," Nathan's voice called gently from behind. Peter, startled, spinning around. His gaze darted toward a tall porcelain urn standing precariously close to where he had stepped. He shuffled back, his ears burning with embarrassment. Nathan stood at the far end of the hall, leaning against the edge of a doorframe. He was dressed casually, his tie missing, and his shirt sleeves rolled up to the elbows, an unusual look for a man who seemed to wear authority as naturally as his tailored suits. "You don't have to be so tense," Nathan said with a faint smile. "We can easily lose ourselves in this house." Peter didn't respond, his hands balling into fists at his sides. He looked back toward the vase, his shoulders tightening. "It's just an old pot," Nathan said, stepping closer. "If it breaks, it breaks. Nothing here is more important than you." Peter's eyes flickered up at him, the words striking him as strange. At the orphanage, everything was more important than him. The furniture, the rules, and even the silence held greater significance than him. Nathan crouched slightly, his gaze leveling with Peter's. "You're free to explore the surroundings," he said. "Touch things if you want. The house won't crumble. I promise." For a moment, Peter didn't move. Then, cautiously, he nodded. Nathan gave him a small pat on the shoulder before straightening and stepping back, giving the boy space. Elizabeth sat in the sunroom, a large canvas spread out before her on the small oak table. Bright tubes of paint cluttered the surface, their caps loose, tiny smudges of color marking her fingers. She angled her wheelchair slightly toward the windows, allowing sunlight to pour in and cast a soft glow on her pale face. She glanced up as Peter hesitated in the doorway. "Come in," she said, her tone warm but casual. "I could use an extra pair of hands." Peter lingered on the threshold, his small frame stiff with hesitation. His gaze shifted to the canvas, then to her face. "It's just a project," Elizabeth continued. "We need to find a way to make this room feel a bit less empty." Her lips twitched in a small smile. "I was thinking of painting a garden. Flowers, maybe. What do you think?" Peter shuffled closer, his steps slow and deliberate. He stood across from her, his hands tucked into the oversized sweater Nathan had found for him. "I don't know much about flowers," he admitted softly. "That's fine," Elizabeth said, pushing a paintbrush across the table toward him. "Neither do I. We can make them up." For a long moment, Peter stared at the paintbrush. His fingers twitched at his sides. He gently picked it up, treating it like a fragile object. Elizabeth watched him carefully, her smile widening just slightly. "Pick a color," she encouraged. Peter's dark eyes scanned the tubes of paint, his brows furrowing in concentration. Finally, he reached for a small tube of green, squeezing a dollop onto the edge of the palette. The color bloomed like a tiny leaf on the surface. He hesitated, again before dipping the brush into the paint and dragging it across the canvas. The line was uneven, the green smudging slightly, but it was deliberate. Peter drew back, looking at the mark as though it was something alien. "It's a terrific start," Elizabeth said, her voice steady. "Keep going." That evening, Nathan sat alone in his study, a thick folder open on the desk in front of him. Seals and signatures marked the papers within, while legal jargon filled the margins. He flipped through them slowly, his fingers brushing against the edges as though they might crumble under his touch. He glanced toward the closed door, his thoughts wandering to the boy asleep in one of the guest rooms. The decision he was making felt impulsive, reckless even. But every time he considered sending Peter back to the place that had driven him to flee, something inside him rebelled. He couldn't do it. The thought of Peter standing in that cold hallway, staring at the porcelain vase as though his very existence threatened it, filled Nathan with a deep, unfamiliar ache. This house, this life, it was more than big enough for one more. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of the decision settling in his chest. "You'll never go back," he murmured under his breath, the words firm but quiet. Somewhere in the house, the soft sound of laughter carried through the halls. Peter's voice, light and hesitant, mingled with Elizabeth's, forming a fragile but unmistakable bond. Nathan smiled faintly, the tension in his shoulders easing. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel so empty. 3 months had passed since Peter's arrival, and the Erickson estate had settled into a gentle rhythm. Mornings were filled with quiet breakfasts by the sunlit windows, Elizabeth encouraging Peter to try new foods while Nathan read the financial news. Afternoons saw Peter roaming the house, marveling at its labyrinthine corridors and hidden alcoves, often accompanied by Elizabeth as they worked on their now vibrant mural in the sunroom. Nathan spent the evenings in the library, introducing Peter to the world of books and igniting a curiosity in the boy that even he hadn't anticipated. But on an overcast afternoon, when the clouds hung low and the air was thick with the promise of rain, the rhythm shattered. The doorbell echoed through the house. Teresa, the housekeeper, hurried past the sitting room, her shoes clicking against the marble floor. Peter, perched on the edge of a chair near the fireplace, looked up from the book he was struggling to read. Nathan, seated across from him with a stack of business documents, raised a brow. "Are you expecting someone?" he inquired. Peter shook his head, clutching the book tighter. A moment later, Teresa reappeared, her expression uncertain. "Sir, there's a woman at the door. She says her name is Cheryl Erickson." Nathan's face stilled, his usual composure faltering for a fraction of a second. The name hung in the air like an unspoken secret, thick with history. He stood, his movements measured but tense, and strode toward the foyer. Peter watched him leave, his stomach tightening with unease. Peter wasn't accustomed to receiving guests, particularly those who made Nathan appear that way. Nathan reached the door, his hand pausing on the brass handle. He took a steady breath before pulling it open. Standing on the threshold was Cheryl, her figure dwarfed by the grandeur of the entrance. Her clothes were clean but modest, her coat slightly too thin for the season. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a stack of papers, her eyes searching Nathan's face with a mix of nervousness and defiance. "Cheryl," Nathan said, his voice low but firm. "It's been a long time." She nodded, her lips pressing together, as if to hold back a flood of words. "I didn't know where else to go," she said finally. "But I think you have someone here who belongs to me." Nathan's brows furrowed. "What are you talking about?" She extended the stack of papers toward him. "I've been looking for him for months. The adoption agency said he was here." "Peter, he's my son." The words struck Nathan with a chilling force. His grip on the door tightened as his gaze flicked to the papers. The name Peter Erickson appeared on birth certificates, legal documents, and photographs. "Come inside," he said, his tone clipped. In the sitting room, Peter's head snapped up when Cheryl entered. His eyes darted to Nathan, then to the woman trailing behind him. There was something familiar in the sharpness of her cheekbones and the way her dark hair framed her face. He shifted uncomfortably as Nathan motioned for Cheryl to sit. "I owe you an explanation," Cheryl began, her voice steady but tinged with regret. "I left home years ago, Nathan. You know why. I thought I was in love, and I thought I could build a life of my own. But Mark, he wasn't the man I thought he was." Peter's eyes narrowed at the mention of a name he didn't recognize. Cheryl continued, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "When I told him I was pregnant, he disappeared. He vanished without warning. I was alone, broke, and too ashamed to come back to the family I'd abandoned. So I did what I thought was best. I put Peter in an orphanage. I told myself I'd come back for him when I could." Nathan's jaw tightened, his gaze fixed on his sister. "And yet it took you 10 years. "I tried." Cheryl's voice broke, raw and defensive. "I returned, only to find him gone. They told me he'd run away. I've been looking ever since." Her words lingered in the atmosphere, dense and weighty. Peter, who had been silent, suddenly stood, his face contorted with anger. "You left me there," he said, his voice trembling but loud. "You just left me." Cheryl turned to him, her eyes filling with tears. "Peter, No!" he shouted, his fists clenched at his sides. "You didn't come back. You didn't care. You simply abandoned me just like everyone else." "Peter, please," Cheryl pleaded, her voice breaking. "It wasn't like that." Peter shook his head violently, backing toward the door. "I don't want to hear it. I don't care." Before anyone could stop him, he bolted from the room, his footsteps echoing down the hall. The room fell into an uneasy silence. Cheryl buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Nathan, torn between the raw grief of his sister and the boy he had come to care for, stood rooted in place. "You should have come sooner," he said finally, his voice hard. "He's not the same boy you left behind, Cheryl. He's been through things you can't imagine." "I know," she whispered, her voice muffled. but I want to make it right. I'll do whatever it takes." Nathan exhaled heavily, running a hand through his hair. "That's not up to me. It's up to him." In the distance, the faint sound of a door slamming echoed through the halls. Peter's absence was palpable, a storm brewing beneath the surface of the Erickson estate. The storm brewing in the Erickson estate grew fiercer with each passing day. Peter avoided Cheryl as though her very presence was poison. If she entered a room, he would find an excuse to leave. His laughter, which had begun to echo through the halls during his early months with Nathan and Elizabeth, now faded into silence. Nathan found himself caught in the middle, trying to maintain the fragile balance of their fractured household. He frequently observed Peter from a distance, observing his tightly clenched fists and the way he clenched his teeth whenever Cheryl's voice floated through the hallways. It was the same anger Nathan had felt decades ago, though he had buried it deep. Nathan stood in his study one evening, a glass of whiskey in hand, staring out the rain-speckled window. The dim glow of the desk lamp cast long shadows across the room. He could almost hear his father's booming voice echoing through his memory. "She's a disgrace to this family," his father had thundered, pacing the length of the drawing room. At the age of 25, having recently graduated from business school, Nathan watched helplessly as his sister, who was barely 19, stood defiantly before their parents. "You don't understand," Cheryl had cried, her voice shaking but determined. "I love him. Mark is a nobody," their mother had interjected, her sharp tone cutting through the air like a whip. "You're throwing your future away for a man who will ruin you." Nathan remained silent, steadfast in his position. He'd wanted to defend her, to speak out against their parents' rigid expectations, but the weight of his own fear had kept him quiet. He could still see the look on Cheryl's face as she stormed out that night, her suitcase in one hand and her dignity clutched tightly in the other. Nathan's grip tightened around the glass. He had let her go then, convincing himself that she would come back and that she would see reason. But she hadn't. And now, years later, the consequences of that night had returned in the form of a broken boy and a sister desperate for redemption. Cheryl wasn't faring any better. She dedicated her days to exploring ways to establish a connection with Peter, only to encounter his icy indifference. She left small gifts on his bedside table, an old book she thought he might like, a sketch pad, even his favorite snacks, but they remained untouched. One afternoon, she found Peter in the sunroom where Elizabeth sat painting. Perched on a stool, Peter meticulously applied paint onto the canvas using slow, deliberate strokes. He didn't look up as Cheryl entered, but she saw the way his shoulders tensed. "That's beautiful," Cheryl said softly, stepping closer. Peter's brush paused mid-stroke. "Go away," he muttered, his voice low. Elizabeth glanced between them, her expression cautious. "Peter, maybe—" "I said go away," Peter shouted, throwing the brush down. He turned to Cheryl, his dark eyes blazing. "You don't get to come in here and act like you care. You left me. You didn't come back. Are you now attempting to impersonate my mother?" Cheryl flinched as though he had struck her. "I'm trying, Peter," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I hurt you. I know I failed. But I'm here now. And I want—" "I don't care what you want," Peter yelled, jumping off the stool. "You're not my family, you never were." He stormed out of the room, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Elizabeth reached for Cheryl's hand as she sank into a nearby chair, her face buried in her hands. That night, Nathan found Cheryl sitting alone in the library, her face pale and drawn. She clutched the photograph Peter had kept so tightly during those first days, the edges worn and frayed. "He's not ready," Nathan said as he stepped into the room. Cheryl looked up, her eyes red. "He hates me." "He's angry," Nathan corrected, sitting across from her. "He's been frustrated for a long time. He is angry at the orphanage, at the world, and at you. It's going to take time. Cheryl stared at the photograph, her thumb brushing over the image. I never wanted this for him. I thought I was doing the right thing. I believed that he would benefit more from my absence. Nathan's expression softened. And yet here we are. She gave a bitter laugh. I don't deserve his forgiveness, do I? Nathan leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. It's not about deserving, Cheryl. It's about earning it. His words lingered in the air, laden with truth. Cheryl nodded slowly, gripping the photograph tighter. Meanwhile, Peter sat curled up in a corner of his room, the door firmly shut. He clutched one of Nathan's books, but the words blurred before his eyes. He thought of Cheryl's face and the way her voice cracked when she spoke to him. A part of him wanted to believe her, to let go of the anger burning in his chest, but the scars ran too deep. No one comes back, he whispered to himself, the words like a mantra. No one. The rain continued to pound against the windows, drowning out the quiet sobs that filled the Erickson estate. The following morning was still, the air inside the Erickson estate heavy with unspoken words. Cheryl, seated at the large kitchen table, traced her fingers along the smooth edge of a porcelain plate. The aroma of fresh bread and eggs filled the air, yet she hadn't touched her plate. Instead, her gaze drifted toward the corridor, where she knew Peter had locked himself in his room again. Determined to try something different, she stood abruptly. Teresa, the housekeeper, glanced up in surprise as Cheryl walked to the stove. I'll handle breakfast for Peter today, Cheryl said softly. Cheryl cooked with a deliberation that was almost reverent. The soft hiss of eggs frying in butter, the rhythmic slicing of fruit, and the quiet clink of plates grounded her. She remembered the meals she used to prepare when Peter was just a baby, the way his tiny hands reached for the spoon she held. When the tray was ready, a plate of warm toast, eggs, and a small glass of orange juice, she carried it upstairs, her hands trembling slightly. Standing outside Peter's door, she hesitated, then knocked gently. No response. Peter, she said, her voice steady but quiet. I made you breakfast. It's your favorite. Scrambled eggs just the way you like them. The silence on the other side of the door was deafening. She sighed and placed the tray on the floor before retreating down the hallway. Behind her, the door cracked open, just a sliver, a small hand darting out to retrieve the tray before it closed again. It wasn't much, but it was something. Later that day, Cheryl found herself in the sunroom with Elizabeth. They worked side by side on the mural, Elizabeth's brush moving in fluid strokes, while Cheryl's movements were more hesitant. Don't overthink it, Elizabeth said gently, noticing Cheryl's hesitation. The paint isn't going to judge you. Cheryl smiled faintly, dipping her brush into a soft pink hue. It's been years since I've painted anything. You're doing fine, Elizabeth replied. After a pause, she added, Peter isn't as hard as he seems, you know. He's just guarding himself. Cheryl set her brush down and sighed. I want to reach him, Elizabeth, but every time I try, it's like he builds another wall. Walls can come down, Elizabeth said simply, her tone calm but firm. But you have to keep chipping away. Give him something real. The breakthrough came that evening, unexpectedly. Peter had left his door slightly open, allowing Cheryl to discern the faint glow of his bedside lamp. Gathering her courage, she stepped inside. Peter was sitting cross-legged on his bed, the tattered photograph of Cheryl in his hands. He didn't look up as she entered, but he didn't tell her to leave either. I remember that day, Cheryl said softly, nodding toward the photograph. Your aunt took that picture. I was smiling because I had just found out I was pregnant with you. Peter's fingers tightened around the photo. Why do you still care about it? He muttered, his voice bitter. You left me, You gave me away. Cheryl sat on the edge of the bed, leaving space between them. I've carried that memory with me every day, she said, her voice trembling but steady. It was the only thing that kept me going when I had nothing else. I thought I was giving you a chance at a better life. I was wrong, Peter. I see that now. Peter turned the photo over in his hands, his anger flickering like a candle in the wind. They tore it, he said finally, his voice low. The incident occurred at the orphanage. They laughed and said it didn't matter. Cheryl's heart broke at his words. It does matter, she said firmly. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Here. Peter hesitated before taking it. Inside was the same photograph, meticulously restored, the creases and tears smoothed away. His breath caught as he stared at it, the familiar image now whole again. I wanted you to have it, Cheryl said, not just the memory, but something real, something that lasts. For the first time, Peter looked up at her, his dark eyes searching her face. There was no forgiveness yet, but there was something softer, something less guarded. He clutched the photo to his chest, a small but telling gesture. That night, Peter sat with Elizabeth in the sunroom, his voice barely above a whisper as he began to speak. He talked about the orphanage, the night spent hungry, the punishments for the smallest infractions, the way the other children avoided making connections because it hurt too much when someone left. Elizabeth listened intently, her hand resting lightly on his arm. You've carried so much on your own, she said softly. You don't have to anymore. Peter glanced at Cheryl, who stood quietly in the doorway, watching but not intruding. For the first time, he didn't flinch at her presence. Instead, he held up the restored photograph, his voice hesitant but clear. Did you really keep this for me? Cheryl stepped forward, her own voice trembling. Every single day. Peter nodded slowly as though processing her words. He didn't say anything more, but the small, almost imperceptible smile on his face was enough. The Erickson estate was quiet, basking in the soft glow of a pale afternoon sun. For the first time in weeks, the tension between Cheryl and Peter seemed to have thawed, leaving room for tentative steps toward healing. We can absolutely mend important relationships if we make an effort, right? Have you ever regretted a relationship that has broken down in the past? If so, leave a comment, green tea, so we have a chance to send you a word of comfort. Now, let's continue. Elizabeth sat in the sunroom with Peter, their conversation punctuated by the occasional laughter that felt like a balm to the heavy atmosphere. Nathan was in his study, sorting through documents, when Teresa's hurried footsteps echoed down the corridor. Her voice trembled as she knocked on the door. Sir, she said, her eyes wide with unease. There's a man at the gates. He's demanding to see Cheryl and Peter. Nathan frowned, standing immediately. Who is he? Teresa hesitated, wiping her hands. He says his name is Mark. The name was a cold shock, dragging Nathan back to memories he had long tried to bury. Without a word, he brushed past Teresa and made his way toward the entrance. His polished shoes clicked sharply against the marble floors, each step laced with mounting anger. Mark stood at the front gates, his posture casual yet exuding a sinister arrogance. He was tall, his hair neatly combed, dressed in a leather jacket that seemed deliberately chosen to project an air of authority. His eyes scanned the estate with a calculating glint, pausing on the grand facade of the mansion. When Nathan appeared, Mark smirked. Nathan Erickson, he drawled, his voice smooth and edged with mockery. It's been a while. Nathan's expression was cold, his jaw tight. What are you doing here? I've come to see my son, Mark said, as though the statement were entirely reasonable. And Cheryl. We have... Unfinished business. Nathan stepped closer to the gate, his presence towering. You have no business here. Cheryl doesn't want to see you and Peter doesn't know you. Leave. Mark's smirk widened. You think you can play the hero? Keep them tucked away in your ivory tower while you write me out of the story. Leaning closer, he gripped the iron bars of the gate. Cheryl was mine first, Nathan. She came to me because she believed in me. And Peter is my blood. You can't erase that. Nathan's voice dropped cold and sharp. You abandoned them. You had your chance, and you walked away. Mark's expression hardened, his tone shifting to a dangerous whisper. And whose fault was that? Your family made sure I'd never be enough for her. You poisoned her against me. You did that yourself, Nathan shot back. Cheryl trusted you, and you destroyed her life. The tension between the two men crackled with the intensity of a live wire. Mark's hand tightened on the gate, his knuckles white. This isn't over, he said, his voice low and threatening. I'll be back, and when I am, you won't be able to keep me from what's mine. Inside the house, Cheryl stood in the shadows of the corridor, her face pale as she listened to the muffled argument outside. She had recognized Mark's voice the moment it pierced the quiet of the estate. Her heart raced, torn between fear and anger. Peter appeared at the other end of the hall, his steps hesitant. Who's yelling? He asked, his voice uncertain. Cheryl froze. How could she explain this to him? How could she prepare him for the man waiting outside? Before she could respond, Nathan entered, his face stormy. It's Mark, he said, his eyes flicking to Cheryl. He's currently away, but he will return? Peter's brow furrowed. Mark? Who's Mark? Cheryl swallowed deeply, her voice barely audible over a whisper. He's your father. Peter blinked, the words landing like a physical blow. My father. His voice wavered between disbelief and anger. Cheryl nodded, her eyes glistening. Yes. He's the man I told you about, the one who left before you were born. Peter stepped back, his expression a mix of confusion and betrayal. You never told me he'd come back. You didn't... He broke off, his hands curling into fists. Why is he here now? Why does he care now? Nathan stepped forward, his tone firm but calm. He intends to control you, Peter. That's what Mark does. He takes what he wants without caring who he hurts. Peter's gaze darted between Cheryl and Nathan, his mind racing. But he's still my dad, isn't he? Cheryl flinched, her voice breaking. Biologically, yes. But being a father is more than just blood, Peter. He's never been there for you. He doesn't know you. Peter's shoulders slumped, his voice a mere murmur. And you left me too. The words lingered in the atmosphere, piercing through any disagreement. Cheryl's tears spilled over as she stepped closer to him. I know, she said. I know I failed you. But I'm here now, and I'll fight for you, no matter what. Peter didn't respond. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the hall. That night, the house felt heavier than it had in weeks. Nathan sat with Cheryl in the study, both of them silent as the storm outside raged. He won't stop, Cheryl said finally, her voice trembling. Mark, he's not the type to give up. Nathan nodded, his expression grim. Let him come. He won't get near you or Peter. Not while I'm here. The Erickson estate prepared for the impending storm as thunder rolled in the distance. The first sign that Mark hadn't left for good was the shadow moving across the Erickson estate's perimeter that night. Nathan noticed it from his study window, a dark silhouette slipping through the trees lining the back gardens. He set down his whiskey glass, heart pounding with a mix of dread and fury. Mark had returned, just as he promised. Nathan moved swiftly, locking the doors and instructing Teresa to ensure the household staff stayed inside. He didn't want panic to ripple through the estate, but he wasn't taking chances. The storm raging outside mirrored the one brewing inside him. Rain pounded against the windows, lightning illuminating the estate in brief, jagged flashes. In Peter's room, the boy sat at his desk, staring at the restored photograph of Cheryl. The muffled sound of thunder made the glass of water on his table tremble. He glanced at the door, his nerves on edge, though he wasn't sure why. A noise, a faint tapping, as though something hard struck the glass of his balcony doors, made him freeze. Slowly, Peter turned to look. A figure stood just beyond the rain-streaked glass. He couldn't see the man's face, but the silhouette was unmistakable. Peter's heart raced as the man gestured for him to open the door. Mark. Cheryl was in the sunroom with Elizabeth, her hands trembling as she struggled to paint. Her brush hovered over the canvas, the vibrant colors she had been working on earlier now seeming meaningless. The sense of surveillance and pursuit persisted in her. "Cheryl," Elizabeth said softly, her calm voice breaking through the tension. "You're safe here." Cheryl put the brush down, her face pale. "Am I? He'll come back. I know him. Mark doesn't give up when he wants something." A sharp noise, a crash of glass, cut through the house, shattering the quiet. Elizabeth immediately wheeled herself toward the door. "Stay here," she instructed, but Cheryl was already on her feet, heading for the source. Nathan reached Peter's room, just as Mark stepped inside through the shattered balcony door. Rainwater pooled on the carpet as Mark loomed over Peter, his hand extended. "Come on, Peter," Mark said, his voice deceptively soft. "We're leaving." Peter pressed himself against the wall, his voice shaking. "I don't want to go." Mark's expression darkened, the charm slipping away to reveal the predator beneath. "I didn't come all this way for a no," he snapped, grabbing Peter's arm. "Let him go." Nathan's voice pierced the room with a sharp edge. He stood in the doorway, his fists clenched, his presence commanding. Mark sneered. "Stay out of this, Nathan. He's my son." "You're nothing to him," Nathan said, his tone icy. "You abandoned him, and now you believe that you can simply enter and take him. Get out of my house." Mark's grip on Peter tightened, and the boy winced. "I can't give birth anymore," Mark said, his voice breaking into an unhinged growl. "Do you understand? He's all I have left, all I'll ever have." Nathan stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "You don't deserve him." Mark lunged. In the confined space of the room, the attack was sudden and chaotic. Nathan caught his arm, shoving him back, but Mark was stronger than his wiry frame suggested. The two men grappled, their movement sending furniture crashing to the floor. The rain and thunder drowned out Peter's shout. Just as Mark took control and pinned Nathan against the wall, Cheryl materialized in the doorway. "Mark!" she shouted, her voice sharp and commanding. Mark hesitated, turning just as Cheryl stepped between him and Nathan. "Leave him alone," she said, her voice trembling, but resolute. "If you want someone to fight, fight me." "You think you can stop me?" Mark snarled, pulling a knife from his pocket. The blade gleamed in the dim light, a flash of steel that made Peter cry out. Before anyone could react, Mark lunged toward Cheryl. She didn't flinch. Instead, she moved to shield Nathan and Peter, her arms outstretched. The knife found its mark, slashing across her side. She gasped, stumbling back, but refusing to fall. "Cheryl!" Nathan roared, surging forward and disarming Mark with a brutal twist of his wrist. The knife clattered to the floor as Nathan shoved Mark away with a strength born of fury and desperation. Peter rushed to Cheryl's side, his hands trembling as he tried to steady her. Blood stained her blouse, but her eyes remained fixed on him. "Are you okay?" she whispered, her voice weak but full of love. Peter nodded, tears streaming down his face. Why did you do that? You could have... His voice broke. Cheryl softly said, You're my son. And I'd do anything to protect you. The sound of police sirens filled the air as Teresa appeared in the doorway, pale but composed. I called the police, she said. They're here. Mark, disarmed and cornered, glared at Nathan one last time. This isn't over, he hissed, as officers pulled him from the room. Nathan kneeled beside Cheryl, his hand pressing against her wound to stem the bleeding. You're going to be okay, he said firmly, though his voice wavered. You're going to be fine. Peter clung to her hand, his small fingers trembling. Don't leave me, he whispered, his voice breaking. Cheryl smiled faintly, her strength fading but her resolve unshaken. I'm not going anywhere, she promised. The storm outside began to wane, but the echoes of the night lingered, leaving the Erickson family forever changed. Cheryl's pale face was barely visible beneath the fluorescent lights as the emergency room filled with the sharp smell of antiseptic. Nathan paced the waiting area, his hands clenched into fists, while Peter sat hunched on a chair, clutching the restored photograph to his chest. His eyes were wide, unblinking, as though looking away might undo everything. Minutes felt like hours. A nurse finally emerged, her face calm but serious. She's stable for now, she said, addressing Nathan. The knife missed any major organs, but she's lost a lot of blood. She'll need time to recover. Nathan nodded, relief washing over him, but his expression remained grim. Can we see her? She's still unconscious, but yes, one at a time. Nathan placed a steadying hand on Peter's shoulder. You go first. Peter hesitated, gripping the photograph even tighter. What if she doesn't wake up? He whispered. Nathan kneeled in front of him, his voice firm but kind. She will. And when she does, she'll want to see you. Peter nodded slowly and followed the nurse down the hallway. Cheryl lay motionless, her face ashen against the stark white of the hospital sheets. The rhythmic beeping of the monitors was the only sound in the room. Peter approached the bed, his small frame seeming even smaller against the weight of the moment. He stood by her side, his fingers brushing the edge of the blanket. I was raged at you, he began, his voice barely above a whisper, for leaving me, for not coming back. I believed you didn't love me. His eyes filled with tears as he looked at her peaceful face. But you do, don't you? You wouldn't have done this if you didn't. He sat down, placing the photograph on the table beside her. You kept this for me. I think I finally understand. His voice cracked, but he didn't stop. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. Peter stayed by her side for hours, his small hand holding hers, the photograph a silent testament to their fragile bond. Nathan returned to the estate that night, his mind racing. He was certain that Mark wouldn't cease his actions unless compelled to do so. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, but the familiar burn did little to calm his nerves. His thoughts turned to the orphanage, the place where Peter had endured so much pain. He suddenly realized that Mark wasn't the only one who required accountability. The next morning, Nathan sat in his study, a determined fire in his eyes. He spread legal documents and reports across his desk and made phone calls, each step a step closer to exposing the abuses at the orphanage. He knew the process would be long and arduous, but he wouldn't stop until every child there was safe. Elizabeth found Nathan later that day, her wheelchair rolling quietly into the room. She watched him for a moment, her sharp blue eyes assessing. You're taking on a lot, she said gently. Nathan glanced up, exhaustion etched into his features. I have to. It's the only way to make sure this doesn't happen again, to Peter or to anyone. Elizabeth nodded, her expression softening. "You're doing the right thing." She hesitated before adding, "But don't forget, you don't have to do it alone." Nathan smiled faintly, gratitude flickering in his eyes. "I know," he said. "Thank you." At the hospital, Cheryl stirred for the first time in days. Her eyes fluttered open, and the first thing she saw was Peter, asleep in the chair beside her bed. His head rested on the edge of the mattress, his hand still clutching hers. The sight brought tears to her eyes. "Peter," she murmured, her voice weak. He jolted awake, his eyes wide with relief. "You're awake," he exclaimed, scrambling to his feet. I believed you wouldn't wake up." Cheryl managed a small smile. "I told you I wouldn't leave." Peter nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry for being raged at you. I'm sorry for everything." She squeezed his hand, her grip weak but steady. "You don't have to apologize. I understand. And I'm so proud of you, Peter. You've been so strong." They remained in that position, holding hands, the room brimming with unspoken words and the beginnings of healing. Back at the estate, Nathan and Elizabeth worked tirelessly to piece together the case against the orphanage. Each detail held significance, and each narrative revealed a strand within the broader fabric of injustice. For the first time in years, Elizabeth felt a renewed sense of purpose, her quiet determination complementing Nathan's fiery resolve. Together, they vowed to fight for Peter and all silently suffering children. The Erickson family, fractured and scarred, was beginning to rebuild. Nathan's study had transformed into a war room, its large oak desk buried under stacks of documents and files. Each paper bore the weight of a child's story, tales of neglect, abuse, and hopelessness from the orphanage Peter had escaped. Nathan sat at the center of it all, strategizing for battle. Elizabeth wheeled into the room, a tray of coffee balanced on her lap. She placed it on the edge of the desk, her movements confident and purposeful. "Any progress?" she asked, her tone calm but invested. Nathan looked up, rubbing his temples. "The legal team is drafting the case against Mark. The assault charges will stand, but uncovering the orphanage will require more effort. It's systematic, Elizabeth. It's not just one or two undesirable actors, it's the entire institution." Elizabeth nodded, her sharp blue eyes narrowing. "Then we take them all down. Every last one of them." Nathan smiled faintly, her resolve bolstering his own. "We will." At the hospital, Cheryl's recovery progressed slowly but steadily. Peter rarely left her side, his once guarded demeanor now replaced by quiet devotion. He would sit for hours, reading aloud from the books Nathan had given him, or simply holding her hand while she rested. One afternoon, Cheryl woke to find Peter carefully sketching on a pad of paper. The lines were rough, but the image was unmistakable. A woman and a child, their hands entwined. She smiled weakly. "Is that us?" Peter glanced up, startled, but then nodded. "Yeah. It's how I wanted things to be." Cheryl's heart ached at his words. "Peter," she said softly, "it's not too late. We can still have that, if you'll let me try." He hesitated, his fingers tightening around the pencil. "You won't leave again?" "Never," she promised, her voice trembling. "I'll fight for you every day, as long as I'm breathing." Peter nodded slowly, a small, shy smile breaking across his face. "Okay," he whispered. The legal battle was grueling, each step forward met with resistance from the orphanage's administration. But Nathan and Cheryl were relentless. Together with a team of lawyers and advocates, they collected testimonies from other children who had endured the same horrors as Peter. Their stories painted a damning picture of systemic abuse, and soon the media began to take notice. Nathan stood before a crowd of reporters at a press conference in the grand foyer of the Erickson estate, Cheryl by his side. Cameras flashed as he spoke, his voice steady and resolute. "This is not just about one child," Nathan said, holding up a thick folder of evidence. "This is about every child who has suffered in silence. We demand accountability, not just for Peter, but for all those who deserve better." Cheryl stepped forward, her voice softer but no less impactful. "I made mistakes," she admitted, her gaze unwavering. "But today, I stand with my son, and I will do everything I can to make sure no child goes through what he did." The press erupted with questions, but Nathan and Cheryl remained composed, their united front a testament to their determination. In the weeks that followed, justice began to take shape. Multiple charges, including assault and child endangerment, led to Mark's conviction, ensuring he would no longer pose a threat. They shut down the orphanage and held its staff accountable for years of neglect and abuse. The implementation of new protections for children in similar institutions marked a small yet significant step towards systemic change. One crisp autumn morning, Peter stood with Nathan, Cheryl, and Elizabeth in the sunroom. The room, once a place of tension and uncertainty, now radiated warmth. The mural on the wall was finally complete, a vibrant garden bursting with color, each flower painted by a different hand. Nathan held a small stack of papers in his hand, his expression a mix of pride and emotion. "Peter," he said, kneeling to the boy's level, "these are adoption papers. It's official now. You're part of our family." Peter's eyes widened as he took the papers, his hands trembling. "Really?" he whispered. "Really," Cheryl said, kneeling beside Nathan. "We're not going anywhere. Not ever." Tears spilled down Peter's cheeks as he hugged them both, his small arms wrapping tightly around their shoulders. For the first time in years, he felt truly safe. Elizabeth watched from her wheelchair, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Come here, kiddo," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Peter ran to her, burying his face in her lap. "Thank you," he said softly, "for everything." She stroked his hair, her own tears falling freely. "You're the heart of this family now, Peter. Don't ever forget that." As the Erickson family stood together, the sunroom filled with light, the shadows of the past finally lifting. Even though the storm left scars, they were stronger, united by love and determination. For Peter, the world was no longer a place of fear, but one of hope. And finally, a home. The Erickson Foundation launched on a brisk winter morning, its mission simple yet profound: to protect vulnerable children, ensure their rights, and give them the opportunities they deserved. The Foundation's headquarters, a beautifully restored building in the heart of the city, stood as a testament to the family's dedication. The logo, a vibrant garden with a single blooming flower at its center, symbolized growth, resilience, and hope. Nathan stood at the podium during the inaugural event, his commanding presence capturing the attention of the room filled with advocates, donors, and families. Cheryl sat nearby, her hand resting on Peter's shoulder. Elizabeth, elegantly poised in her wheelchair, watched with pride as Nathan began to speak. "This foundation was born from a tragedy, but it is fueled by hope," Nathan said, his voice steady and resolute. "No child should ever feel forgotten, discarded, or alone. We are here to ensure that every child has a voice, and that voice is heard." The crowd erupted in applause, but Nathan's eyes were fixed on Peter. The boy, no longer the frail, mistrustful figure who had appeared on his doorstep, nodded quietly, his face glowing with a mixture of pride and belonging. The event continued with Cheryl sharing her personal journey. Her voice, once hesitant, now carried strength and conviction. "This is not just about my son," she said, her eyes sweeping across the room. "This is about every child who has been silenced, every mother who thought she had no options, and every family who dared to hope. Together, we can create a world where children don't just survive, they thrive." Elizabeth spoke next, her words carrying the quiet authority of someone who had endured her own battles. "Every small act of kindness can grow into something extraordinary," she said, her gaze resting on Peter. "This foundation is our way of planting seeds for a better future, one child at a time." As the event concluded, the Erickson family stepped into the foundation's main hall, where tables were lined with gifts for children from local shelters. Brightly wrapped packages filled the room, each one carefully labeled with a child's name. Peter stood in front of a table, carefully selecting a small box wrapped in green paper. He held it for a moment, his expression contemplative, before turning to a young boy standing nearby. The boy's wide eyes and hesitant smile mirrored the Peter of months ago. "This is for you," Peter said softly, handing over the gift. The boy looked at him, surprised. "Really?" Peter nodded, his voice steady. "Yeah, it's yours." As the boy tore into the package, revealing a small toy truck, his face lit up with joy. Peter smiled, the warmth in his chest growing. For the first time, he felt the power of giving back, of being part of something bigger than himself. Nathan, Cheryl, and Elizabeth watched from a distance, their expressions a mixture of pride and emotion. "He's come so far," Elizabeth said, her voice thick with emotion. "We all have." Nathan nodded, his eyes never leaving Peter. "He's stronger than I ever imagined." Cheryl clasped her hands tightly, her gaze soft. "He taught us all how to fight, to believe again." The family stood together, the moment a quiet testament to their journey. The scars they carried no longer defined them. Instead, they were reminders of the battles they had fought and won. As the sun set, painting the city in hues of gold and crimson, Peter joined his family on the foundation's front steps. He looked up at Nathan, then at Cheryl and Elizabeth, a question lingering in his eyes. "What's next?" he asked. Nathan placed a hand on his shoulder, his expression warm. "Whatever you want, Peter. The future is yours." Peter smiled, the weight of his past lifting a little more. For the first time in his life, the world felt full of possibilities. As the Erickson family stood together, the city bustling around them, they knew their work was only beginning. But in that moment, they also knew they had found something unshakable: each other. And for Peter, the once lost boy who had found his way home, the future was brighter than he had ever dared to dream. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. Share your feelings with us, and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values, yet entertaining. See you there.